87.2. Our director has a question for Justin.
So, Justin, what is the conventional wisdom in terms of the Obama administration refused to use the word Islamic terrorism, and now the Trump administration uses it quite readily. And then secondly, how do you feel about the ban early on in the Trump administration and his policies toward Iran?
Very good questions. Thank you for asking them. The first question was on the use of the term Islamic terrorism.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a lot of hesitation that went into the Obama administration with referring to terrorism by Islamists or jihadists or people who identify with Islam as their faith. I think that's because post 9/11, there's been a lot of discrimination of Muslims in day-to-day life as depicted as terrorists, dangerous, etc. I mean, TSA is enough to show you as an example what people who look Muslim tend to face under those circumstances. And so I think the Obama administration tried to take that into consideration. However, we cannot hesitate for a second to denounce Islamic terrorism, just as we would denounce Jewish terrorism, Buddhist terrorism, Christian terrorism. If you are killing civilians with the motivation of certain elements or distortions of a faith, that's still something that you can identify, and you should identify in order to eliminate that issue. Second question was...
Well, wait, let me ask a thing, which is, do you think the readiness to focus on Islamic, so-called Islamic calling Islamic terrorism by name, actually, I don't like this question, it's dumb, but how does Islamic terrorism, which kills fewer people in America by far than white lunatic terrorism, how does the calling things by name or not call, how should we think about Islamic terrorism versus the mass, active shooter mass killers who largely tend to be white guys in America?
Something I'll be frank about is that you have way more white people in the United States, and you have way more white supremacists in the United States than you have Muslims or jihadists or anything you can conceive of in that category in the United States. However, we have to look at this from a broader angle and acknowledge that while the majority of terrorist attacks in the United States up to date are committed by white supremacists and must be denounced equally, in the global stage, most terrorist attacks that we can identify, or at least that the news media identifies, maybe there is a bias, who knows, is Islamic motivated terrorism. And that needs to be taken into account from an international perspective.
Okay.
Second question.
Wait, can I respond?
Sure.
Okay, I don't know that that's true, that there are white supremacists running around causing tremendous terrorism in America.
Well, white guys.
Well, okay, I think what you're talking about, which is a really sad commentary, is that white people are committing crime in America. I mean, in other words, the difference between Islamic terrorism and crime is that people in America commit crime, but people that are committing terrorism in order to further the Islamic ideology are Islamic terrorists. So if I leave the house right now and I get in a fight and I shoot somebody in Compton, that's not terrorism. That's not a white guy committing terrorism.
No, that's crime. But
that's crime.
But when a guy, an unbalanced guy, walks into a bank because he's got some weird issue and shoots 5 tellers that he doesn't even know.
That's not Christian terrorism.
No,
that's
it's
crime.
not. But it is, and that's why I didn't call it white supremacist terrorism. But it is white guy mass shooting.
But by the way, the greatest mass murderer in the U.S. was black. His name was Gosnell, and he was an abortion doctor that murdered hundreds, if not thousands, of people, of babies.
Wait a second. Are you now equating, when you say babies, what are you saying?
They were actually born. They weren't abortions. He actually would kill one-day-old babies and their mothers.
When was this?
This was in the from the 70s up until about 20 years ago, or up until the 90s and the 2000s. He was finally caught. He was in Philadelphia.
Okay.
And what he would do is he would wait until the baby was dead, was born, and he'd strangle it to death or cut its head, cut it by the neck. And they found a warehouse full of dead babies.
Why? Because he just liked doing it?
Yeah, he was crazy.
All right, well, all right. So, but I would say that we've got more of a problem with a crazy guy mass murderers in the U.S. than we do with, I'm not saying either one is negligible, but I'm saying that by sheer numbers, crazy guy mass murders in the U.S. Kill more people than Islamic terrorism does.
Yeah, but you're confusing crime with a religious purpose. In other words, during World War II, we also had crazy people that would kill people, but we still fought the Nazis.
Yeah, no,
You're
but I'm not
conflating
saying,
two different issues.
I'm not saying you can disregard it, but what I'm saying is in terms of of people's awareness. I used to get annoyed at my mom because she would watch dumb 70s and 80s crime shows like T.J. Hooker, and her whole picture of crime was based on like Barnaby Jones and T.J. Hooker and 70s crime shows, and perhaps to some extent local news, and it just gave a I mean, this is a dumb thing, but like on Barnaby Jones, people were always getting like shoved into a fireplace mantle, and everybody on Barnaby Jones, their heads were only as thick as an eggshell. And always in the first 5 minutes of Barnaby Jones, there'd be a domestic dispute where somebody would get pushed, they bonk their head, and boom, they're dead. And then things ensued from there. And it was just a completely dumb picture of how anything works.
I would just like to apologize, Justin, for my learned opponent. He tends to change the subject sometimes. You just have to wait until he figures out.
that
All good.
That go ahead and call it Islamic terrorism if you want, but also like write at least as many op-eds on crazy mass murderism, whatever. Anyway, next question.
Equal news coverage. I agree, 100%. Can't have double standards, disproportionality of that coverage. Next question.
What's conventional wisdom in terms of the circles you run around with, or your knowledge, in terms of the Trump policies, for example, the Trump ban early on, and then Iran?
It's ridiculous. I'll explain why. The vast majority of these countries that he's listing a ban of, these countries have not had terrorism against at least American citizens since the late 70s, I believe. And really, when he's in cahoots, so to speak, with Saudi Arabia, other regimes, these are countries breeding terrorism. And so if you want to issue a ban based off of ideologies or terror groups that are consistent with what's actually happening, then you have to keep that in mind. But no, because of power dynamics, because of international relations, kissing the hands of certain monarchs, reciprocally, whatever, this is why we don't have a ban of travel for Saudi Arabia and like-minded regimes.
And then you had one more question.
One more question.
Lance, do you want to respond to that?
Oh, the Iran deal. You can respond.
I think that the United States is under attack from Islam. I'm in favor of banning immigration from Islamic countries. I think that...
all of them or some of them?
Well, obviously it has to be decided on a case-by-case basis. If we're in the middle of forming an alliance with Saudi Arabia, or we have to work with the King of Jordan, who's an ally of ours. There could be a variety of different parties from the Islamic world that we could have here. My point is that since 9/11, we've got 1 million Muslims, immigrants to the United States. And I would think that once a creed has declared war against you, your mission would be to try to control immigration from that region. So I'm in favor of any control of immigration from the Muslim world that is practical, because they're at war with us.
But you're saying it's not practical if we're friends with them, like Saudi Arabia, even though like 14 of the 19 hijackers came from Saudi.
Well, right now Saudi Arabia has formed an alliance with Israel against and the U.S. and Jordan and Egypt against Iran. Now, if for some reason we have to have Saudi pilots come here to train, or then I think we'll have to do it. On the other hand, they are funding Middle East studies programs in universities in the U.S., which is changing the population of young people to being against Israel. So I think we need to stop that. So what I'm saying is, and by the way, the Muslims know perfectly well what they're doing. The Saudis are not insulted. They know that we're trying to defend our country and Israel against Islam. So we need to work with them when we can and when we have to, and we need to have a cold, absolutely truthful eye on that ideology and prevent it from spreading to our country.
All right, I'm going to do the thing I always do, which is just quickly, and you can say it's ridiculous, that's fine, but I'm going to do the robot girlfriend defense. We've got a million Muslims who've come into the country in what, the last?
Since 9/11.
All right, so that's a little less than, that's 17 and a half years.
Actually, in 1960, the Muslim population of the U.S. was about 60,000. It's now up to over 3 million. I don't think that's a good. I don't want that to happen.
It's still less than 1% of the U.S. population.
Yeah.
And I'll say that by the year 2100, we're going to be coexisting with 1 trillion AIs in the world. And if you want to worry about stuff, at least in America, where we're under 1% Muslim, don't freak out about Muslims unless you're also going to freak out about how AI is going to make everything weird.
Actually, I am, and I'll tell you why. Because the Muslims that, of those million Muslims, of those several million, 3 million or more Muslims in the U.S., they've just elected 2 Sharia-following congresswomen to the U.S. Congress who both hate Israel's guts and want it destroyed. So every time you bring Muslims into this country, you are nailing another nail into the coffin for Israel.
Justin.
Don't you interrupt me. I'm not done. If you care about Israel, you will not bring in people that will vote in congressional leaders who want to destroy Israel.
All right, so,
and I think we have a right to pick sides in this matter and favor Israel and not do things that are going to endanger that country. And if it means not letting Muslims come to our country and vote and create radical anti-Israel congresspersons, then so be it.
well, let's bring in a related deal, which is Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez.
Can I first comment on that?
Yeah, do.
Okay. I just think that the most dangerous motif of this conversation is the idea that Islam is just a monolithic thing that everyone is embracing the same exact way, practicing the same exact
way. Which Islamic country favors Israel?
Outwardly?
What do you mean outwardly?
None.
None. Thank you.
Right.
Next
outwardly
question.
none. No, it's so much more complicated than that. It's not a monolith, and
why don't you just admit that it was?
No. Outwardly.
Outwardly. So let me get this straight. Every single fucking Muslim country in the world can want Israel destroyed, but that's not monolithic.
Azerbaijan is good friends with Israel for better or worse.
Egypt had
A Muslim
signed
country.
peace treaties with Israel.
Really, Rick, you're on the Egyptian side now.
You have
That's good.
No, I mean,
That's
Israel,
good.
Egypt's a freaking mess. I don't know that much about.
No, that's good. That's good. You believe in Egypt now.
No,
That's good.
I mean-
I'm sure they want nothing but the best for Israel. Good
But-
work, Rick.
But they
And
did-
Azerbaijan. Hey,
There's a lot of-
don't forget the Azerbaijanis. They're good friends to Israel.
All right, so what's your argument?
Okay, my argument is essentially that Islam manifests in politics today because there's so many different countries and ethnicities intersecting with Islam. There's no monolithic experience of Islam. You might find commonalities.
Except that they all want Israel destroyed, except for Azerbaijan.
Okay, I don't think every single Muslim country wants Israel destroyed. They might
Prove
not be
it.
best friends with
Prove
Israel.
it. Prove it.
Okay,
Prove it.
Egypt has a peace with Israel. Jordan has a peace with Israel. You can call it a cold peace. That's fine, but not every single Arab or Muslim country participated in eradicating efforts to eradicate Israel in 48,
Yeah.
67,
Yeah,
73, etc.
Egypt and Jordan would love it if Israel was destroyed.
At least they used to. Today, it's not in their interest in terms of security, in terms of
Yeah,
economy.
and if it wasn't, they'd love it if Israel was destroyed, and you know it.
For theological reasons or for economic?
It doesn't matter to me. It doesn't matter to me. I want you to admit right here, right now, that Egypt and Jordan would love Israel to be destroyed. Don't make excuses for them.
If the alternative was a perfect country, fine.
What do you mean a perfect country? Do you mean if just on a matter of opposition to there being a Jewish nation in the Mideast without any other political consideration?
Let's say a totally secular or Muslim or even Christian nation. By the way, I don't believe that another Christian country would exist, survive in the Middle East, considering what's been happening with Lebanon, Syria, etc. But let's say that a Palestinian state comes to form, and it's the new one-state solution. Okay, Muslim majority country or something of the mix. If Egypt and Jordan had security guarantees that everything was going to be Gucci just fine, then they'd say, okay, all right. But that's not what's going to happen if that's the reality, and that's why Israel's existence and security is in their best interest.
What is the pulse of the youth in Iran, like folks your age, right now, would you say?
There is a growing phenomenon in Iran now, as in 79, so to speak, to reverse what's happening in terms of power. We have protests, social media, little instances of rebellion, of women removing hijabs and dancing in public, little acts of civil disobedience and resistance that the young generation is taking part of. That's not to say that every single young person within Iran is a part of this movement for change. However, it's growing in its popularity
Are you
and
seeing
its
that in any other
significance.
countries?
In the Middle East?
Yeah.
I'm not quite sure.
Okay.
I'm not
And
quite
do you,
sure.
Right,
and do you support that, Justin?
I really don't know. Look, I don't know how many people foresaw what was coming in 1979, but hopefully whatever regime follows the Ayatollahs will be something much more democratic, something much more pluralistic and equitable for the peoples living in Iran.
Right, so
And would you say that Islam has anything to do with their oppression in Iran?
It does.
Okay.
A specific kind of Islam, Shiite Islam, and now I wouldn't even say it's fully Islamic because they have various, you could say quasi-democratic, I wouldn't even use that term, oligarchic structures in Iran that give rise to certain leaders and show some form of shared power among their elites, their councils, etc.
So we were about to talk about AOC, Alexandria Cortez, who has not, she was asked if she would categorically prohibit sanctions against Israel, and she said that she wouldn't do that, and we had an argument about I said that, that she's young. It's her first time in national government. That she'll learn more stuff, and she'll, I would hope, develop a more sophisticated point of view or more educated point of view about Israel and the importance of Israel, and that I'd also, hope you mentioned the two Muslim women who I guess follow Sharia law.
Yeah, and they'd like it here too.
Would you mind naming them?
They're both from Michigan, but I don't know their names.
Ilhan Omar from Minnesota.
Okay.
That's one I can conceive.
So how do you feel?
And,
are you
Rashida
optimistic
Tlaib
about these women or about AOC becoming more outwardly supportive of Israel, or at least acknowledging that that their beliefs are not gonna impinge on?
First of all, it takes education. You're not going to get anywhere, on a news interview where you're being asked about the local politics in the Middle East and you don't know how to respond to why you believe BDS is the right thing to do, why one-state solution to Palestine, etc., is the right way to go. You need to not only lobby these politicians, but you need to show them how fundamentally the way they've been led in regressivism is not going to help them in their long-term political careers. People are looking at Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and seeing how she is simply acting on a prescribed ideology. Okay, when people are talking about, I'm pro-nationalized healthcare and I'm pro-choice and things like that, I automatically have to be anti-this or anti-that. And that's extremely fallacious and dangerous. And that's one of her fatal flaws and the fatal flaws of many in Progressive Caucus. So I don't know how we're going to educate these people if they come at these issues with either willful ignorance or hubris, but we have to get them there some way and somehow.
Well,
you're not necessarily optimistic.
Rick has told me that he
really.
would vote for her for president against a typical Republican.
There's a caveat, because Lance likes to put the opinions and thought. You don't like when I say what you think, but
No, I asked you directly, and you said you would. We can go back to the tape. If you
well, no,
want.
but I would say that she's not even legal to be president for another 6 years.
And then I had to say, if she was the right age and she was running against a typical Republican for president, would you vote for her? And you said yes.
With the caveat that I would hope that she
There were no caveats.
Well, I maybe wouldn't vote for her if she was going to be anti-Israel.
Well, she is. She wants to destroy it.
No, she doesn't want to destroy Israel.
The boycott, divestment, and sanction movement would destroy Israel.
I don't think she
doesn't necessarily know that. You said people have to be educated.
Right,
about
she doesn't know that.
I don't want to vote for somebody that's so fucking stupid that they don't know they're advocating for a country to be destroyed.
When you were 29, you didn't become conservative for another 12 years after you were 29.
And that's one of the reasons I didn't run for Congress, because I knew I didn't know anything. She's a member of Congress, Rick, and she's so stupid, she favors the destruction of another country.
She doesn't know all the...
You would vote for a stupid person.
62 million people voted for a stupid person. Actually, no, more than that, because Jill Stein's stupid.
Yes.
Gary Johnson...
Has Trump attempted to destroy Israel?
No, but he's not as...
So he's not as stupid as a country.
Wait,
that's not necessarily the litmus test.
I've made this offer on TV,
Yeah.
on Inside Edition I made this offer. On Twitter I've made this offer, and I'll make it on our little show. I will take it if Trump is willing to go up against me on an IQ test, and if he scores within 35 points of me, I'll spot him 35 points. If he beats me, I'll cut off one of my toes. And the only reason I'm only going 35 points is that a lot of IQ tests stop at 150. So I may hit the ceiling of 150, but I think there's a chance Trump might be able to score 115.
Would it be Muslim style, no anesthesia?
Sure. Fucking those pruning shears. I get anesthesia afterwards, but yeah.
You know what? I'm so disgusted right now that I just want to hear Justin's opinion of OAC. What do you think, Justin? AOC. Please take over. I'm not going to respond.
She is a very charismatic woman of color, and I would like to see more women of her stature in power. However, with education, with decent opinions on issues that impact millions and millions of people, not just in the United States, but outside the United States.
So, do you think that she's going to get educated? Do you think that people are going to school her on the implications of decisions involving Israel?
I don't think it's politically expedient for her to apply that education in her career, like Bernie Sanders. I, as a registered California Democrat and someone who sides with progressives on a lot of issues, I can tell you that Bernie Sanders, he gets a lot of things right, but he gets a lot of crucial, critical things wrong, and that's a conscious choice when he's been dealing with foreign policy for ages, and he is unwilling to see the fatal responsibilities of Hamas and of the Palestinian Authority in perpetuating the Israeli-Arab conflict, or apply that in his policies. That's an active choice, and that's not something I want to give power to. So those that are supporting Ocasio-Cortez, Rashida Tlaib, supporting Ilhan Omar, with the knowledge that this isn't going to help anyone, or the lunacy that it will, we can't expect that they'll change. And that's just a reality. So we have to elect more informed candidates that are willing to take serious stances on serious issues with a foundation, not just what seems trendy based off of what social media calls for.
Okay, well, now let's go to a very serious issue, which is Roger Stone was indicted by, I need my hands for this, by Mueller a couple days ago. And one question that comes from this indictment is, why does Roger Stone look so frickin' weird? And one is he dresses like a crazy person a lot. Another reason is that he's one of many people involved in the various, the current political scene who have a head full of hair transplants, as I do. The deal is all this whole front of my hair here consists of hunks of flesh that contain hair follicles that were sliced out of the back of my head, and then the doctor goes stab, and stabs the front of your head 400 times with a little scalpel, making a bunch of little slits, and then he leaves, he goes to the next person. The nurses spend the next 2 hours cutting the hairy flesh from the back of your head into little kind of cubes, and then using tweezers to plug them in, hair plugs, they plug them into the holes in the front of your head. And Roger Stone has a bunch of these. So he's got a strangely strong hairline, bizarrely far up towards the back of his head. Like Chuck Schumer has the same thing. Biden has plugs. There's a guy who shows up on CNN and MSNBC, David Frum, who looks pretty pluggy to me. Steven Seagal has a head full of plugs. And the way to see a plug head is that I did a smart thing and a very stupid thing when I started getting plugs, which is I filled in my existing hairline from youth. This is my old hairline that I still had into my 20s, though it was getting thinner and thinner. And the reason it's dumb is because then you have to fill in all the way back here to it's a lot of head to cover. Other people who start later, because I started getting plugs when I was 29, people who start later in their 30s or 40s, their hair's already crept way back, and then so they have a hairline that starts maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches further back than mine, like Schumer, and it costs less because they have more forehead that they haven't planted, and you know and as long as you've got like Nicolas Cage, he and Gene Hackman, you don't see him in public anymore, but they went all the way back to here before they drew a little line of hair with plugs, which is much cheaper. But it's also a giveaway when somebody has a super strong hairline, but it's 2 inches back, and which is Roger Stone and some of these other guys. And finally, why are hair plugs so relatively more prevalent, you know, in the people involved in current politics? Because the same jackass who's sufficiently vain to want to have a nice strong hairline might be the same jackass who you know, gets involved in politics for personal aggrandizement. All right.
I have a question.
Yeah.
And I'm not trying, this is a legitimate question that people may have. Why haven't they invented something for hair growth? Scientists have invented like something that's as simple as growing hair, but yet they can predict climate change.
All right, so
Okay.
if you go to the websites,
Do you need your hands?
you know, I can put my hands back and yeah. Okay, so if you go to the websites for people who are losing their hair, there's all this stuff on the horizon. For instance, there's hair cloning where they'll be, because you're limited. Oh, also Donald Trump has had hair work. We know that he had a scalp reduction where they take your bald spot and they just cut it out and then they sew the sides of the hole they created together. And this is a bad idea because it kills the hair eventually you get a bald spot right where they filled it in. It just kills more hair. And there's a whole incident that was in the deposition of Trump's divorce from his first wife where she recommended the surgeon who did this to Trump, and it really hurts because they're cutting off part of they're scalping you and then sewing your head back together, and he comes home and his head really hurts, and he beats up and sexually assaults Ivanka, not Ivana, his daughter, but no, I mean Ivana, his wife, not Ivanka, his daughter, because she recommended this surgeon. But anyway, there's always, you're limited in doing plugs by how much you can spend, but more importantly, how much hair you have in the back of your head to move to the front. But there's this thing called follicle cloning where they can take some of your follicles and duplicate them so you can grow unlimited hair follicles.
Can you stop moving?
Sorry. And this is supposed to have been, I don't know if anybody's actively doing it. There's that, mostly it's money. Where, like if you develop a diabetes drug, like metformin is the most popular diabetes drug in America with 50 to 60 million prescriptions being written every year. So that's, if you came up with a new blockbuster diabetes drug, you might have 1 billion customers across the world who have to spend a significant amount. I think metformin is a generic now, so you can buy it's like $0.10 a dose or something now. But I don't think there's enough money in the bald guy business to justify the huge research push because the two major hair loss pills were not developed for hair loss. they were developed. One was developed. They were both developed for people, for old guys who get swollen prostates, which means that they have to piss like 4 times a night because the prostate rides your ureter, the tube that goes from your bladder out your wiener. And when your prostate gland, when it blows up when you're an old guy, it makes it hard to get all the piss out of your bladder, so you have to keep getting up and getting up. And these 2 pills, Avodart and Proscar, were developed for these guys, and then they noticed, patients noticed when they started taking these pills that they got hair back. But almost every guy will develop an enlarged prostate. And so that's a big money deal, and you're going to want to develop drugs for that. Not every guy is going to be so vain that he wants to spend a couple grand a year on a pill to keep his hair. So, yeah, they could. I mean, you know, the more people, or if you ask why, if we can predict global warming, why can't we develop a hair drug? And the deal is weather affects 7.5 billion people on Earth. But there aren't, you know, there's only, you know, there are only maybe 30 million guys on Earth who are sufficiently vain that they'll spend hundreds of bucks a year. Okay. All right. Also tonight, another thing, Black Panther, that was the SAG Awards tonight. Black Panther won, I think, Best Ensemble Acting in a movie. Everybody in Black Panther won a trophy for acting. And you have a position on Black Panther, which is, have you seen it, Justin?
I have.
Okay, so we'll get your opinion too. Lance?
All right. My opinion of the film Black Panther is that it's the most anti-black film I've ever seen. I can't even believe that the actors would take the roles. First of all, the thing that got me started on it was that in order to choose the leader of Wakanda, the most advanced country in the world, there has to be a knife fight in a waterfall. And I maintain that if black people are sufficiently advanced, they will choose their leader by voting, and that they could have a parliamentary system or a president, and that they could elect a prime minister, and that it would be one man, one vote, and that the leader would not be chosen by who was the best knife fighter in a waterfall. The second point is that the people...
Can I respond to that?
No. I have the floor. The second thing is that I was impressed by the behavior of the black people in Wakanda. For example, in America, we wear suits and ties, and we are somewhat divorced from nature. But in Wakanda, there are the rhino people, the ape people, and the panther people. And I think that that bespeaks of a certain primitive quality among these Africans. You would think that they would identify with, say, political movements or religion or something more advanced. But when the gorilla people came to fight with the panther people, they would go, hoo, hoo, hoo. And I think to me, making gorilla noises is a really primitive behavior, and it would seem to me that black people would be able to just talk like you and I do, for example, using words, verbs, nouns, not just hoot, hoot.
Yeah, but there's a ceremonial aspect to that.
Well, we don't have any gorilla ceremonies.
They do have the NFL.
Well, there you go. So my point is that the depiction of black people in Black Panther was the most degrading depiction I've ever seen. And I can't believe that people aren't disgusted by it.
How the fuck did you come up with this?
Oh, and by the way, they fight with spears. The black people in Black Panther fight with mechanical rhinos and spears, unlike Europeans and North Americans who fight with tanks and pistols. So it's really degrading.
All right, so my response
Does
is...
Justin have?
I do.
Go ahead.
That was a lot.
Never thought of it that way, did you?
No, I didn't. Whether you might consider that point of view to be conscious or unconscious prejudice, I'm not putting you on the spot. I'm just saying there's a lot to unpack with that, because there's a lot of deep accusations there. I think that you have to understand there was so much pride and empowerment that was put into this film and its cast and everything about it for black communities, not just in the United States, but in the greater African diaspora, within Africa itself, etc. You have to understand there's a merging of the sanctity of tradition and innovation. And that's why I think these aspects of the film are so beautiful. When you're talking about all these sounds and these tribal, primitive, whatever you want to call it, like, maybe if you want to interpret it that way, fine. I don't see it any different in European society where you have certain peoples, maybe in the past 100 years, 50 years, 10 years, 1,000 years, you name it, enacting the same sounds or behavior or stories.
How long has it been since a European leader was chosen by a knife fight in a waterfall?
Okay. That is just to make it dramatic. You think it would be, they would call it like Lord of the Rings or something, and I like Lord of the Rings, don't get me wrong. They'd call it like Lord of the Rings if you had like some form of democratic council raising hands and saying, aye, nay, you know, that's like some boring bullshit. People don't want to see that.
What do you mean some kind of boring bullshit?
It's not exciting. You have to have
you have to have
combat.
black people fighting each other with knives to choose a leader?
You know what? In a previous Marvel movie, the leaders of Wakanda were actually meeting in some kind of United Nations-like parliament.
Right.
And this went on for a couple minutes until terrorists blew up the parliament, because that's more exciting than parliament. You can only have so much parliament in a Marvel movie.
Frankly, I don't think they need to have any. I just think that it's very peculiar that black people can't just vote. They choose their leader from a knife fight.
It's a freaking comic book movie, which
but I mean, in comic book movies about white people, there are presidents and senators that are elected by voting.
Yeah, because those are set in actual countries with actual politics.
And why can't black countries have actual voting and governments? Why are they chosen by whoever's got the biggest muscles? Isn't that kind of embarrassing and primitive?
I do think, I actually think there's a little point there. There's an argument.
Oh, it's breaking through even to a Democrat, even to a millennial.
I think this goes back to the idea of cultural universals versus like the subjectivity of certain regions and peoples, etc. I see that. I just think that...
I guess they're just a bunch of violent, stupid people that pick whoever has the biggest muscles as their leader.
I think it was the hybrid of tradition, because we know if you're looking at European history, there's plenty of melee, savage battles.
It's been thousands of years
since
Europeans decided their leaders by
who
was the strongest swordsman.
Really not.
You
can talk about guns, germs, and stuff.
The Wars of the Roses in the Middle Ages was the last time a leader was chosen.
England still picks its monarch, its ceremonial monarch, by who spits out the first male baby in the family.
Yeah, but in Wakanda, whoever wins the knife fight is the decision maker. He's the equivalent of the prime minister.
All right. Here's when you look
and in Europe, they haven't chosen a leader by who was strongest. since the 10th century.
It's a comic book
Even
movie.
William the Conqueror wasn't the greatest warrior in England.
It's a frickin' comic book movie.
But why isn't it a comic book movie about black people that are very sophisticated in how they choose their leaders? Why don't they choose their leaders by who is smartest or wisest? Why does it have to be...
Let me get a word in, Lance. Fucking take a look at Superman. The quintessential, the first huge superhero. There's nothing that's not straightforward about Superman. Very straightforward and basic, written for kids by guys who were not going to become famous novelists. A very basic character. In fact, it's so basic that they had to hang all this extra stuff on him over time to make him less straightforward. He wasn't initially immune to kryptonite. He's the most bland and straightforward white guy superhero doing white guy stuff. Just a guy who, when he's not...
Get to the point, Rosner.
The point is, very Captain America, basic.
Well, what about these people?
Hold on.
What's your point?
My point is, it's comic books. That all these characters come from comic books. Superman, very basic. Wonder Woman, pretty frickin' basic. Captain America, basic, not psychologically super sophisticated. The only one who's got any nuance among the big early comic book superheroes is Batman.
This argument isn't going anywhere, Rick.
Yeah, it is. That comic books are fairly straightforward, and with the Marvel movies, they're trying to marry modern production values and adult plots to these kids' books from 50 years ago. Black Panther was created by Stan Lee and his partner in like 64 or 65.
When people didn't have as enlightened a view of black people as they do today.
Created by two white guys.
True.
55 years ago. And the Black Panther, Black Panther, the comic book hero, came earlier than the Black Panthers, the black activists.
So these two white guys figured, well, if black people were to have a superhero, he'd be from a country in Africa where there's gorilla people and rhino people. And you know how they'd become the ruler of Wakanda? Well, he'd be whichever black guy had the biggest muscles. They wouldn't be going to Harvard or writing papers about political science. Oh no, it's going to be a knife fight because that's the way black people make their decisions. Is that what you're telling me, Rick?
I'm saying Black Panther was created by two white guys in 1964.
And it shows.
All right, so...
Thank God we don't live in that era when people have such bias.
It's an ongoing problem with superhero movies that you're taking kids' stories, Justin has a thing to say, and adapting them into $200 million movies for everybody, including adults. Go ahead, Justin.
I think we're all just kind of trying to virtue signal a little bit here. Hopefully that's not like a non-PC word. If it is, screw it, whatever. But I think that it does take a little bit of privilege and entitlement to be able to say, because there haven't been a lot of movies with people that aren't white, at least in the Western world. It's hard to find that once you have a movie that's led mostly by black people, that they can't represent themselves the way they want. I don't think, even though you can say that this superhero character was created by white people, I think today when people have the volition and capacity to see beyond that and make whatever it is they want out of the character, why can't we give them the credit that is due and the agency that is due to represent themselves as best as they want? And that includes folklore, that includes some mysticism and adventure, and not necessarily boring old dry, what you might consider humane or democratic or civilized principles. This is about a superhero character. It's about tradition. It's about peoplehood. It's about heritage. And I think this movie gives so much voice and power to people, whether they're of African descent or not, simply because for people whose heritage was stripped away from them and they were homogenized in Western countries like the United States, where you had people from coastal West Africa, from Central Africa, other places just merged together and had to be one. They weren't entitled to have their cultures anymore, which is very sad. So this movie, if you've looked at the designs, for example, I read an article of all the unique designs featured in the movie. They come from actual African ethnic traditions. And so that's giving people a voice. That's giving Africans a voice. Other people, as a Jew, I related to that just to the same extent of having some reclamation of heritage brought back in diaspora. So we can claim discrimination all we want, but so long as the people who are representing this film, we can't say that they are representative of the opinion of every single black person. But what we can say is there is a message of empowerment and a new wave of representation that they are now in control of, that we have to reckon with, and we cannot deny it.
All right, one more thing.
Can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's actually interesting because now I'm wondering what Stanley's motivation was, why he used this particular society, this African society, because there were African societies where the man had to fight online to get the girl. And there are some African societies where the man had to have a certain status in that society and pay money to the family of the woman that he wanted to marry. So if the question is, why did Stanley choose this African society? Why did he choose and create this Wakanda instead of, according to Lance, not a more sophisticated one? It's an interesting question, but I don't think the movie was that fucking deep. I don't think it gave black people a voice or made us feel empowered. It was a comic book movie. It was entertaining. It was very well written, and it's just a lot to take in, especially after Lance's speech that this was somehow represent what black people in some way or show us in a primitive light when it's a traditional African village, African society. You know, just as we see some movies with Native Americans, we don't say, oh, well, why are they dancing around a fire? Oh my God, that's so primitive. It's not primitive to them just because it's not a big office with papers and books and computers doesn't mean that it's primitive. It's the way these people chose to live.
Yeah, and comic book movies, there's a certain lack of comic books in general, like same deal with Asian culture and like Marvel's Iron Fist and Doctor Strange. Stories for kids written by not the most sophisticated writers. Stanley has during that era, he was editorializing for civil rights and against prejudice. But there was some simplicity. You have your first generation comic book heroes like Superman, really basic. Then you have your second generation heroes like Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four, who are more psychologically developed and have more like angsty, real-world kind of relationship problems. And then Deadpool, third generation, totally fucked up and weird. But it takes generations it took 70 years to get to Deadpool. Oh, contribute, Lance versus Rick at gmail.com, PayPal. Okay, we support the show. We got 4 people on tonight's show. That costs money. Yeah, so like this elaborate production, this studio, it all costs millions of dollars. So send us $5 to lanceversusrick at gmail.com. That's our PayPal account. We'll eventually be on Patreon, and then you can do it if that'll help. But right now, just go to lanceversusrick@gmail.com. Thank you.